My name is John Guido, and I'm from L'Arche. Is that correct? And I come here today.
Hold on, I didn't choose my concept.
It is, that's what I was. I can do that. What's orange like?
No, I've got it.
I'm gonna, thank you. That way I can always. So I come to you today not as an expert. I come to you as someone who has been for 30 years a member of the L'Arche communities here in Toronto and the one in Richmond Hill Daybreak, which were once one, and have done a lot of study of the area of grief in aging and in death, but really have lived it. And I come here today with, I'm going to share some stories of people, some of whom are living and some of whom have died, because it's in the stories, it's in the journey that we really can talk about grief. You really can't talk about grief just as a topic of academic concern. It is so personal. Your topic for the 3 days is transitions. And every transition brings grief. In every transition, there's loss. Even the transitions we're most excited about. I just completed 12 years as the regional leader of L'Arche Ontario, traveling through the 9 communities of L'Arche in Ontario, representing them in Canada, internationally. And I was done after 12 years of traveling in the role. I was really excited to come back to my local community and get more engaged with the daily life of our community members. And I'm excited about that. And on Facebook yesterday, there were pictures of an international gathering of the coordinators from around the world in L'Arche. And all of them were people for 12 years, most of them were people for 12 years I was working with, attending these very exciting meetings talking about how L'Arche could be present in the world. And I was so happy to see that. I'm really glad that I'm no longer carrying that responsibility. And I was really, really sad. I was very sad that I wasn't there with them. These are really beautiful people doing exciting work. And I'm no longer part of it. When we're born, most of us cry. We're grieving the greatest loss of our life. It was so wonderful. We've never been closer to a person in our lives than we were when we were inside our mothers. That's actually a reality. It's a physical loss, it's a physical change, but it's a shock. It's an entering into something new that no one's prepared for. Life outside the womb. We live in that transition to what is this new reality? Breathing air in my lungs. Having to eat food, even if it's still from my mother. So transitions. Grief is part of them. How do we grieve? And again, as you heard this morning, when we look at death, the other great transition of life, our society in North America really doesn't want to look at it anymore. We live in an age-denying culture and a death-denying culture in so many ways. Not everywhere, but in so many places. If you're an actress in Hollywood, your whole story is about ageism and the need to stay young so that you have a career. Very few have been able to make that transition and stay in the public eye. So, I've had some great people walking with me. I would have come today with Greg, who's just a few years older than me. And like Greg, I'm also looking at aging issues. In my early 50s, he's in his early 60s. But we've been walking together for 30 years. He welcomed me to L'Arche. The two people in these pictures I'm with, one is Dorothy in Ottawa, and I picked her because she looks so sweet, and she really is. She's got a face that would just break your heart, melt your heart, you know. She's such a darling. And she's also the most strong-willed person I've ever met. And she's very clear of what she wants in her life as she's aging. She could have come this morning with Peter and presented. She's a great self-advocate. So don't be fooled by that face. The other pictures of Melvin and me. Melvin also welcomed me 30 years ago. And when I came to L'Arche, I was 23. I wasn't aging. I just left school. There was a grief in leaving school. Graduation ceremonies are transition ceremonies. They're not really rewarding the success story. They're really about the impending change of life. Leaving this other womb of the university, going out, or the high school, going out to the world. I had just left that. And I was in the new world of working out in the world, and Mel welcomed me. And I was new to Toronto. My story engages grief very early though, because at 23, my sister was 17, and she was dying from cancer. And I came to L'Arche knowing that I would be going home when she needed me. She was still completing high school, still trying to live as much of a normal life as she could. But her illness was impending. Her death was going to be coming soon, and we knew that. So when I arrived in L'Arche, it was Mel who accompanied me in grief. 20 years older than me, almost to the day. We're about 4 weeks apart birthdays. He's born in 42 and I'm born in 62. And Mel was the first person I could talk to about the grief I was facing, anticipating the death of my sister. There were all sorts of priests and counselors in my life, but it was Mel who was the first person. And he just would say, I know cancer, my mother died of cancer. But he didn't say it from here. He said it from something really deep down, deeper than his feelings. And it meant a lot to me. So my story, each of us has a grief journey. You cannot support anybody else in the journey of loss, the journey of change, if you're not in touch with your own grief journey. Not every 23-year-old lives with terminal illness in their family, but we all touch loss. And some of us have experiences where we're helped to deal with that, like I was by Mel. And many of us have stories where we're not helped. So today's focus is on aging, not death. But of course, death's a big part of something you have to face as you're aging. You do your funeral planning if you're smart, if you're supported well. That puts you in touch with anticipating your own death, what our whole culture is trying to deny. You also will likely have parents, family members, and friends. My aunt just died at 93 and said, don't have a wake service because all my friends are dead. It's only going to be the family. She outlived all her friends. So that's those. You think about those things as you're aging. What are some of the losses that come with aging? Just free
Mobility.
in the microphone.
I got just mobility.
Those can be related, mobility, independence.
There you go. Anyone else
Some
want to
dreams.
yell? Turn yourself into that one.
Can you get this? I'll say, repeat this for the microphone. Some dreams. So dreams for your life that you will not be able to fulfill. Is that all? Dignity. One way dignity. So microphone.
Lots. You're about to look after your body, care, you know.
So the need for people to look after your bodily care, the loss of dignity.
Loss of employment.
Employment, major transition. I'm going to say a little bit more about that in a minute.
Okay, so with the loss of employment, obviously financial.
Huge issue, the poverty of seniors. You've been hearing a lot about this lately, especially with the argument for an increased provincial or federal program.
Along with mobility, many people have a hard time with losing their driver's license.
Huge loss. Independence, a sense of personal power and control that the automobile means for so many people.
So that would be mobility and accessibility.
So with loss of mobility means so many things that you can't access. 100 years ago, it was an end of almost the entire way of being in the community to have a physical disability. And that can happen with aging even today. So many barriers set up. Couple more? You got it? So you get the picture. There could be many more losses. The loss of your circle of friends. You know, look at even if you're a veteran today, there's an enormous social circle of your peers. Now you're going to be one of the remaining veterans of World War II. So your enormous life experience that changed your life, that you had a community to remember with, is disappearing. So many ways that go to people's lives. Okay, we have a picture. I think it could be there's tremendous, and this period of time of loss isn't 1 week. These are gradual. Sometimes we don't see them coming until we realize that we've lost something very important to us. There's also loss of cognition, often for some people, which means the capacity to process this loss diminishes. Okay, we'll come back to some more of these in a little while when we talk about the people we support. What about possibility of gain? What gains can you have in aging? Microphone.
Right here.
You can get away with a lot more. I plan to, when I get old, to be very bold.
Wonderful. So the Red Hat Society. I have friends who claim the title of crone because they're going to live their life as they want it now, finally.
Oh, over here.
Independence.
Independence. Say more.
Permanent vacation from work.
Yeah.
I'm not subject to traffic jams. I don't have to get up early. Just do whatever I want on my timetable. So
many people experience a tremendous loss in the end of their careers, their jobs, not feeling useful anymore, no one wants anymore. But many of those people, and many others for whom their work wasn't the end all, the transition to a place of really having more freedom. People who might have their mobility, might have economic, the money to do things they want, those things matter too, but also might have community. They might even just, it doesn't take money if your dreams are ones that you can fulfill in your community. So there's a potential for doing, people say just the ability to sleep in is a gift. So the sense of being, not necessarily only on permanent vacation, that's one way of living it. Another could be that I'm choosing to do the things I really want to do now, because I don't need to earn the income.
You might have more time to meditate and reflect on the meaning of life.
Wonderful. So meditation, reflection on the meaning of life. That's a big part of what I want to share.
Seniors discount.
Yes. And in the United States, they make like 54 or something. You know, it's great. And that helps it because your income may go plummet, so it does help to get those senior specials.
I like to have friends, lots of friends. They say that when you have a lot of friends, you'll live longer and happy.
Yeah, so for many, many people, their seniors actually allows them to have more space for their friends and for their family. For many, many people, and this will be something maybe as a good transition to the next topic, it's also a time to have more time with your family, with your children, your grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Now that I can really be free to spend that time with them, I can focus on that. For some couples, it's a time of rediscovering their relationship. I'm just also on Facebook seeing friends who are down in the Carolinas. I'm just envious as could be. But every day they're doing something wonderful, like that advertisement for the people who win $1,000 for life. They're just doing the things they want to do together. And they look like newlyweds, even though they've been married for 30 and 40 years. And it's really wonderful. So there are opportunities for more space for the things you love to do, the people you want to be with, and sometimes that's even new people, right? Many people find new relationships, a new romance, even in their senior years. They have the space for that, and they have the space for personal reflection, which sometimes allows people to discover who they really are when they're not living under pressure and stress of the rat race. They really get in touch with themselves. So I wanted to share this because Greg couldn't come with me today. Greg is a man with disabilities. So if you don't know l'Arche, it's the international community organization of local communities founded by Jean Vanier, Canadian in France 50-something years ago. And one of the distinctive things is the people who are supported and the people who support them make a home together, live in the same home. And like me coming at 23, we kind of blur the lines a little bit. We provide competent care and support. We set boundaries as we need to, but there's also a kind of experience of being housemates together and sharing life together. So one of the people who welcomed me was Mel. Another gentleman was Greg. He couldn't come today because he actually broke his arm and he's going to the doctor. But I met with him the other day. He has lots of time. He's like a retired person right now. He actually works in a supermarket, but he has to be off work because of his arm. And he's enjoying it for a little while. He's also looking at, he's too young to be retired. But he is an artist as well. And Greg has been part of a grief project, a grief group in Toronto, reflecting on the loss of family members, reflecting on the potential losses of old age and aging in our lives, as well as his own, thinking about his planning for the end of life, as you were talking this morning. He's been part of that group, and he's one of the leaders in it. He's really found his voice there. And then a little later, I'll tell you a little story about Greg. But as an artist, this is what he drew to talk about grief. The clouds and rain are a symbol for being sad in your heart. That's core of grief. The sun represents the light of God and choosing to be open to new things as well as sad. Not denying the sadness, but at some point discovering your openness to something new coming. The heart reminds you of being loved and listening. It's all about the people who walk with you. How can we be people who help facilitate that or be those people who love and listen? The retreat can be a sign of protection, spending time together, and forgiveness. Forgiveness is another potential in the aging process and in the grief process. My sister, as an 18-year-old, had the wisdom to have her 4 brothers and sisters sit down and told us we had to forgive our father. And when you have an 18-year-old sister dying, you listen to her. And that was so healing when my father died, because we all listened to her and done some work there. She did it first, and she let us there. The flower invites us to be light and love for others and remind us we cannot do it alone. Nothing I can say will be any better than what Greg said. And in that is everything that we need to talk about. So just in your handout, there's some, in the book, not in the handout, but in the material you have this morning. This is a very nice definition of grief, the constellation of internal thoughts and feelings. And on the back page of the handout, there's a lot of the characteristics of grief. I think it's really, really helpful when we talk about people with disabilities, that we look at that list, because we want to say, you know, we're all in this together. There's no distinction between us on a range of abilities. And some people who are leaders of corporations are as disabled in grieving as anybody. So when it comes to grief, it's the category of disabilities breaks down a bit. But there are some unique conditions for some people with disabilities that we should talk about. But the important part I want to bring attention is this word about mourning. So the title this morning was Bereavement. Another way is to talk about mourning. When we have these feelings, these intense, often complicated feelings, I'm angry at my father, I'm sad he's gone, I'm disappointed that I'm not in Europe now at this meeting, but I'm happy I'm done with the job. It's very complicated. But what is the process in which we allow that grief to have the potential for healing, helping us grow, helping us discover more about who we are? That description of a potential of aging. We all grieve as we age, but if we are able to live a continued life of confidence, meaning, and grace, we must also mourn. Not we probably could mourn, but if we're going to make sense of losses, if they're going to have impact in our lives, we have to mourn. And then again, as we just said earlier, that this can be about liberation from the role, liberation from whatever that role is. It's not necessarily our work role. Maybe it's the role of being a spouse or a parent or a child. For persons with disabilities, maybe the roles aren't always the job, but the boxes people get put into. Growing older invites an awareness of our inherent value, while recognizing that we're more than the sum of our accomplishments or work product. It invites us to remember the gifts we have to offer our family, friends, and the world around us. Okay, so we have, before lunch, I would love for us to have a conversation at our tables about this question then, as for the people we support, what are some of the things that will be different? So that's on the workout page, the question. They had that thing. What are some of the things that might be different for them? What are some of the challenges we experience providing support? And how do we look at how that will influence our work as people who have a responsibility to help people who might be grieving their losses? So let's take some time together at your table and talk about what might be different, or what in your experience is different for some of the people you support. And it'll be a range.
Okay, sorry, I was saying, one of the challenges we talked about is that for someone with a developmental disability, they might want to seek more, it might take a little bit more time to process, and unfortunately, because they're relying on supports around them to share the information, people close to that person might not want to share difficult news, and so it does sort of get hidden from that person when they, in fact, would actually benefit from more time discussing.
So the research that people have done still supports this, even today, that many people with disabilities who might need more education around the losses of aging, what's happening to my body, what's what might happen in my life, what's happening to my family members, they might be shielded from some of the difficult feelings, and therefore not get the education to understand what's going on, nor the support to emotionally process it and do more.
does that safe space look like to process and then express that mourning, that process and emotional, you know, is that through art, or just by crying, or another example is someone is laughing, that's okay too? You know, what does that look like for the individual?
So in the description, when you're talking about here, the environmental and lifestyle factors, what are the realities for that person? How do they express their feelings? What are some ways around communication that they might be able to express their feelings and know that they're understood by somebody else? That, you know, what might be considered inappropriate, that someone would actually try to understand what's going on beneath that rather than just to try to prevent that bad behavior. Where is there a safe space for them to feel these feelings in the first place, identify them, and to mourn? One, two more?
Oh, right behind you, Jason.
So some of our individuals aren't even a part of the process. Our table was discussing that there are some members that we support were told or notified about a passing in their family, like immediate family. So, and that was because the family members like, well, they can't handle it, they won't understand. They've never been through the process. We don't know if, we don't know how they would react. There's no, you can't assume they'll be inappropriate at a funeral if they've ever been to a funeral.
So that whole culture, and especially there's work to be done with families, but there's also work to be done with other support systems in people's lives. How are people allowed to be part of? In fact, it's their right to be part of their family, but it's how can we work with the other caregivers to help them understand the importance. It's not only the issue of not being present to someone you love as they die. It's also that you don't understand the processes of death when you never see dying. So cancer is a journey that people live through. If you only see someone sick and then they're dead, and you were never allowed to be even witness that, how will you understand your own illness? How will you understand what illness is? People are kept protected from something that they need to live through, and that we all will live through. Aging, the changes of aging when they're not allowed to see those. How would they understand, how would they make sense of them and see that they're not alone, that these are things that are part of life? Some parts of aging are the normal parts of aging. So people with disabilities experience that. So if they already had cognitive losses or disabilities, or if they have sensory deprivations, they might be increasing as they're aging, as they are for the whole population. But it becomes more complicated. So when people have multiple losses in their ability to process the world around them. And if people aren't reaching them and discovering their way to communicate what's going on inside, it might become harder to understand what's going on inside as they're aging. The hereditary factors include illnesses that this population of people might have a higher frequency than the general population, often much earlier than the general population. So we know of people with Down syndrome who might have dementia in their 30s, 40s, at a much higher rate than the general population. And so there's many, many types of losses. Another type, and we talked about that with death, but also within life, people aren't in their living process, that the hyphen between birth and death, people aren't always able to process multiple types of losses. If you lived in an institution and your roommate disappeared one day, and no one even told you they were leaving, you have no idea. If they died, moved away, and you were not able to process your feelings for the loss of someone you love. That can happen with the change of the loss of family members, the change of staff and who support them, people in their social circles. Things disappear all through their lives. So before going to lunch, we were talking about some challenges that we as people supporting individuals who are aging and experiencing grief for their changes and losses of their life. But what also might be strengths that we know. Some individuals who we support have for entering into this process of grieving as they age. What strengths might you need? So again, to the microphone, if you're speaking. Okay, so their resilience, so their capacity to, when things are difficult, to be able to pull up their bootstraps and find a new way to go forward. Some amazingly resilient people. Other thoughts? It's not as simple. It's not, doesn't come as obvious, does it? Maybe it's just you have to get into the mind of thinking, what does this grieving mean around loss? But there's some capacity. I mean, some people have written about this. I don't think it's very well studied. But from our experience, we know sometimes, for some individuals, when their lives, they've had less of the big status jobs, less controls in their life, they've learned in life to be in this resilience, to be able to, even if they're not getting the support that they need, to find ways to deal with the changes they've lived in their lives. They often, many people might have, as Jane puts here, some strengths around their emotional capacity, their ability to relate to other people, to reach out to people, and build relationships might be more primary for many of those individuals. And so as they're changing, they naturally find people who they can talk to, who they can build community with. And sometimes people actually have some strengths and abilities that come out as they're grieving and as they're walking with other people who are grieving. So I'd like to share a little bit about that. So I just love telling stories about people, and these are people who, if I'm sharing more personal stuff, there are people I've already spoken with in the past about these topics, and they were very supportive of it. They want their stories told. But these two gentlemen have both died subsequent to our work together. But Ian was someone I was very close to, and I just want to compare Ian to Ernie, who's the fellow on the other side. And Ian, who I lived with for 3 years, had been when he was in his 20s, his parents were no longer able to support him. So he had a very full life in the community, and then his parents placed him at Duronia, and then he went to Edgar before coming to L'Arche as a senior citizen. So he was already aging. And we, in our wisdom, encouraged him to join a seniors club in his 60s because it seemed age appropriate. He was so furious with us that he made everyone's life miserable, and he would have been voted off the island by the seniors if they had a chance. And they made it very clear they were as sick of him as he was sick of being retired. Even though he was in his 60s, he'd spent his 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s retired. He was waiting to do something, to make something of his life. So in his 60s, he learned to take the TTC around the city he'd not lived in since he was a little boy. He spent his childhood in Toronto and his teens in Montreal. So he had this whole world open up for him. And one of the things we did as then, after several years working all over the city, he actually had to start slowing down because of his body was no longer able to handle going off to do full days of volunteer work all over the city. And at that time, we helped him write his life story. And he didn't really want to talk about HRC and Edgar very much, because as far as he was concerned, nothing happened there. But he talked a lot about his childhood in Toronto and in his teens in Montreal. We helped him write his life story, his memoir. We went back to his childhood church and met someone who was a parishioner of the Anglican church when he was a kid, who knew his father and didn't remember him very well, but knew the church in those days. We took the boat to Port Dalhousie, where the church picnic was held. And later on, when he was actually in long-term care, I actually drove him out to Montreal, where he went to Pointe Claire and see where he grew up. And he announced that the street had gotten smaller since he was a kid. So the memoir was very important for him, remembering his story and remembering the good stuff. It was another way of grieving what he'd lost. but he was sharing it with us young people. He was sharing about good old days with us. Now Ernie's another fellow, he actually lived in Arnprior, and he lived in Smith Falls when he was young. And he had limited childhood memories, but he did grow up in his town when he was a little kid, in a small town. A friend of mine who was in this community of L'Arche planned something similar to what we were doing today. He was going to go back to his hometown and revisit where his parents were buried and the church where he was christened and where the house was. And she was very excited about this. And Ernie was very excited about this trip too. And when they got to the town, he said, or Noreen asked him what he wanted to do first. He said, I want to have lunch with you. And then they had lunch in a little diner in town. And then she said, what should we do next? We have all these places we could visit. He said, I'm ready to go home now. He had gone to this trip to have lunch with Noreen. He didn't want to go back to those memories that weren't important to him for whatever reason. Maybe he'd already let go of them. Maybe he had grieved because he had left there to go to Smith Falls. Everybody's different. What was good for Ian wasn't good for Ernie. I was doing a seniors gathering for people from all across Ontario at L'Arche, and it was all going to be focused on music and remembering the songs of the past. This is something Ernie's very happy to do. But the musician, at the very day of it, came down with the flu or something and couldn't come. The whole 2 days was centered around the musician leading music. We were going to do all this work with creativity around singing. And when we got there, we had no musician, no program. So Ernie said, I'll lead it. And for 2 days, he led us in singing those songs that they all knew, because they were all the songs from his childhood. That's what he wanted to remember, not where he grew up. Dorothy's another person who, for 63 years, lived at HSC. But coming to live with us as a senior, she had to advocate against the wishes of her family. She was heard and was able to come. And she also wanted to make a life in the community. She did so many things. She learned to cook, she created relationships with so many people. She'd write letters to a different person every day who she met in her senior years. She had become deaf as she aged. She hadn't been from birth, but she created her own sign language. We tried to provide some instruction, but she didn't want it. She created her own sign. She was very capable of being understood. In the end, she had a very difficult end. A lot of pain. It was very, very, very hard for all of these people who fell in love with her as this vital senior to see that this was going to be taken away from her after such a short time. And it was a very, very hard passage, but she lived it because she had built this circle of people. She was able to grieve deeply, not so much the life she left, but the life she created. And finally, one of the most important people in my life is George. And when George died, I grieved the way some men talk about when they lose their father. When my father died, that didn't happen for me. I wasn't that close to him in some way. When George died, I was lost. It took me days to kind of reorient myself. But we lived through something really, really painful together. He identified with his work and being a strong man so much that as his body failed and he was approaching retirement age, he couldn't process it. He tried, but he couldn't process it. He had therapists, he did everything right, and he still couldn't process it. And it was very, very hard on his birthday when he turned 65 that to take him out, we had to carry him kind of one person on each side because he was sitting. So that's a very sad story, but it can be true. You know, there's times when walking with people, talking with them, doing rituals, writing life stories, it doesn't guarantee success. And we have to be able to identify when it's too much and a person needs professional help. But the story didn't end there. Because once he was able to get that help, he made an incredible passage. He rediscovered his life without being a strong man physically, but being a strong man in his creativity. He became an artist. In his compassion, that was always there, but instead of it being secondary, it became primary. He delivered Meals on Wheels to seniors younger than him, and he was and he brought them life and friendship. He was a small town guy, and he made a small town out of Richmond Hill. And at his funeral, dozens and dozens of young people from a baseball team that he helped coach, from the diner where he used to go hang out, the young waitresses were there crying, and many, many people in Marsh and his other sort of his church community. He became a mentor. It is possible to have these types of transformation, discover who you really can be when some of that external stuff is taken away. So, if we had more time, I'd have you jump in here, but please think about this question for a second before I give some answers, but we won't have time for a table discussion. What are some of the things we can do to help the people we support who are aging to grieve well? How do we see that as something instead of to avoid because it's so difficult to talk about? What can we do to help them? Let's think about it for a second. You can write a note if you want. So some of the things, and you can find a lot of this information on ConnectABILITY in the OPAD site, and then Marsh has a site called Aging and Disability. It's all in your handout. But these are some of the best practices. I like this quote from Jean Vanier, which you have written down. Jean Vanier, the founder of Marsh, has written a book about depression, not an exciting topic. But he talks, in order to emerge from the state of loss and grief and begin a new life, there is a passage of mourning that you can move to new life. People need not so much a therapist as friends who are prepared to walk with them. Even George, who needed a psychiatrist and needed medication, to come past that, to mourn his losses after he was well enough, he needed his friends. These friends cannot, nor should they try to take away the grief. And that's a big temptation for caregivers and people who support people in loss. You can't take it away, but rather accept it with them. The grieving process has its own particular rhythm in each person. It needs time. You should not try and make it disappear quickly through artificial ways and distractions. Sometimes people need to cry, scream, and shout their pain, anger, and frustration in order to free themselves. Gradually from the pain, and find a new life. If people get stuck in crying, screaming, shouting their pain, they need help. Because that's not the outcome. We're not providing great support by helping people continuously grieve. And how to live their grief as they need to. They might need to grieve continuously over time, but not intensely at all times. And so it's important that we listen really, really well, but not only that. So there's great materials out there to talk about getting older. What does it mean? What's actually happening to me? How do I feel about it? What are the things I'm gaining as well as losing? That's in this booklet from the Down Syndrome Society Scott. What are some of the things that might happen? And as you educate, you get an opportunity to talk. But it's about actual things rather than kind of plow and grief. You can start talking about the parts. You talked a lot about transition planning this morning, but remember that as you're planning all those rights and choices, it's going to bring up grief. And if you have a circle, can the circle create space where that grief can be dealt? Talk about that safe place for the person to grieve. Rituals, we often create them in large faith communities, in communities that are helping, a lot of around the AIDS crisis of 30 years ago when there were thousands of young people dying of AIDS in North America. Their community created rituals. They helped people express what they couldn't express simply, the deeper stuff. Whether it's religious or you understand that in different ways. But ritual helps everybody to express these deeper realities. And they can be significant. Giving up the car keys came up earlier. How do we ritualize those losses that can be quite significant, that are meaningful for the individual? So Greg is in this picture, and I talked about Greg, and that's his artwork you saw. And this is Greg with his mom. Sometimes we assume we need to care for and protect people so much, we don't know that the incredible strengths they might have to support their loved ones, family, friends, as they're dying, when they're very sick. Greg loves to talk when we speak together about how reciprocal our relationship is. When his mother, who's in this picture, was dying, and it was complicated because he also been sent to live in Neuronia, I was there to support him, he says. And when my sister died, when I was in my 20s, Larsh Daybreak sent Greg. And I was at first a little disappointed, to be honest, because I was hoping Mel would come, who was my buddy, who had been supporting me so much. And Greg, I didn't know how he was going to do, but our family welcomed him into the home because he was our guest coming from Canada down to New Jersey. And we didn't have anybody else in the home except my grandmother because there was a lot of grief when a teenager dies, even if you're prepared. And I didn't know how it was going to be for Greg. Maybe it'd be too much for him. Maybe he'd be inappropriate. Difficult circumstances. Instead, he learned, and we discovered, an incredible gift for presence. Our parish priest was useless because he thought he had to have the right things to say, and he didn't. What do you say? So he would come and leave. Even the grief counselor for teenagers that they sent wasn't really very helpful. He played the guitar, and that was nice. But Greg came, poured a cup of coffee, and sat with my father, who everyone was a bit afraid of because he had internalized all his grief. And Greg just sat with him as he drank his coffee. Didn't look away, wasn't nervous or embarrassed. And it was exactly what my father needed, exactly what my family needed. He was very proud, and he discovered that he has a gift that he could share with other people. Some other things we can do is to do, and this you can see on ConnectABILITY, help people create scrapbooks, memory books for their loved ones who they've lost. Not only so that they can go through the process of remembering, but so they can share. Sometimes people have a limit of their capacity to tell other people about something important to them. the book becomes a vehicle for them to share about someone important. And the ritual of creating the book is very powerful. Anniversaries remain important. My sister's birthday, she's been dead for a decade, and my mother spends the day crying. It's important that we find places and times to help people remember. Another project, and you can see this on the large slide, Aging and Disability, is for the individual to write their own memoir. Maybe not the way Ian did because he wanted to tell the story. Some people might not be able to. So we've created a project of inviting people from the person's life who are still living to write a letter, send photographs. And it does two different things. One, all these wonderful stories start flooding in about how that individual changed the life of the letter writer, how important they are to them. But it also reestablishes a lot of links to people who might not be so present in their life anymore. So as people were aging and their circle of people who've known them starts diminishing as their peers and their elders die, they rediscovered old connections. And some of those people came back in their lives because of this project. Grief is stressful. When people are sharing about their feelings about it, they also need a time to get some space to get a break from it. They need to be able to do the things that help them relax and heal. Just to find peace. And that might be prayer for some people, listening to music, a bath, it could be physical exercise. A cup of tea is the great English tradition and it works. Whether the person has it themselves or they're sharing it with a friend. You can discover more about a specific project of the grief group. We've had some extraordinary experience. Bereavement groups exist, and people could attend community bereavement groups in their faith communities if they have them. They exist. They may or may not be very accessible to some people because they make it too wordy. So how do you find ways that either create your own or to work with the group to make it more accessible? Okay, we talked about when people need to get professional help, but the key point of this from Sheila Hollins is the studies show that a volunteer who has bereavement experience is shown to be more helpful than a professional who does not have grief experience. Grief it's not just a disease to be treated. It's not just a bunch of symptoms. It's something that needs a certain type of attention. So the ideal is to find a professional who has that bereavement experience and is complex like George's. Okay, so we talked a little bit about this, and I just end with, there's some wonderful opportunities. Aging, in some ways, be a great equalizer. That people who are aging with disabilities might find a peer group with a typical aging group. There's some people that they'll discover that they can join in and find a place there. There's a wonderful video on the OPAD site of that. And one of the distinctions we didn't quite talk about, but I think is very significant. Most people with intellectual disabilities do not have children of their own. And the number one support circle for people in our worlds remains the family, and the number one source of new life is connecting to younger generations and children. It's not for everybody, but it is still, my mother says to me, because I don't have children, who will be there for you when you're my age? Not to just do healthcare routines, but to say, Nona, I love you. You're the most important person in the world. It's very important that as we look at the support circles people are building, that they have the opportunity to connect to new generations, young children, if that's something that's good for them. And finally, there's a wonderful piece, the Shared Learning Forum on ConnectABILITY, From Heartbroken to Heart Open Grieving and Bereavement, by people who really are professionals at this. So I really recommend that to you. And we're out of time.